before every haunting is a history. The Lemp family, once titans of industry, forged their empire in the 19th century by being one of the first to introduce and popularize lager to the American public. They had an uncanny ability to give people what they craved before they even knew they wanted it, and as a result, they became the richest of their era, unshackled from the material problems of most. With their wealth, they built the Lemp Mansion on the south side of St. Louis, Missouri, and it was a monument to their success. Yet, dark limestone caves warped beneath the grounds, connecting their home to the nearby brewing operations, a pulsating artery that carried a darkness without a name. A staggering succession of suicides collapsed their empire into rubble, almost as though each was pulled by a siren's call behind the veil. One by one, they fell, spurred on by the losses that came before. In their surrender to grief, they drove one another deeper into the darkness, as if the weight of their history was inescapable. Now the mansion stands as a testament to a legacy destroyed, haunted by the spirits of a family bound not just by blood, but by unspeakable pain they could not outrun. It has been restored and renovated, but many claim the Lemps never left. Visitors report eerie, unexplained encounters, disembodied voices echoing through the halls, the chilling sound of footsteps when no one is there, doors that unlock and lock by themselves. But beneath the fresh paint and refinished floors, the bones of the building remain the same, whispering of a family doomed to repeat their tragedy, burdened by the only legacy they haven't lost. In 1803, the city of St. Louis, Missouri was incorporated, and just a few decades later, its streets filled with an influx of German immigrants who brought with them a taste for breweries and beer gardens. Johann Adam Lemp surfaced from a hazy history. Born at a time without official government birth certificates, the exact date of his birth is unknown, as are the circumstances of his early life. He ran a restaurant and brewing operation in Germany as a middle-aged man, but it's rumored that he struggled to remain focused and financially solvent. In the short span of a few years, he suffered the loss of his first wife, firstborn son, and both his parents. It's speculated that he left his second wife, remaining children, and significant debts to flee to America to escape creditors. In 1840, he established a small grocery store at Morgan and 6th Street. He was around 40 years old, and he took to preferring his middle name, Adam, likely as an attempt to Americanize himself. Lemp began manufacturing his own beer and vinegar in small batches at the back of his store. It's likely that the vinegar was coincidental, as the production of alcohol often yields vinegar as a natural byproduct. It wasn't long before beer sales began to outpace his other products. In 1840, he established the Western Brewery in name, and in 1841, he leased a building at 32 South 2nd Street to expand production. The property was located close to the Mississippi waterfront, and according to a contract from 1842, a naturally refrigerated limestone cave was hidden beneath the land. Here, Lemp fermented and stored his beer before selling it at Lemp's Hall, a small pub attached to the new factory. At the time, Americans largely consumed liquor or ale, but Lemp introduced a lesser-known style of beer from his homeland, the lager. He was the first in St. Louis, and one of the first in the nation to do so. The term lager comes from the German word for storage, referencing its fermentation process. While ales are fermented at the top of the barrel in warm temperatures, lagers are fermented at the bottom of the barrel in cold temperatures. This method resulted in a brighter and crisper flavor profile that quickly won over the local population. The beer flourished in St. Louis due to the comprehensive cave system beneath the city. Brewery employees chipped ice from the Mississippi to store in the fermentation caves to keep the beer even colder. In 1845, Adam Lemp purchased a plot of land at the mouth of a limestone cave some distance away. He began excavating this cavern to increase storage capacity. Beer would be brewed at the 2nd Street location and transported to the caves for storage. One reporter at the time estimated that it ran over 50 feet deep, 100 yards long, and averaged 20 feet in width. By the time of completion, it held over 3,000 casks of Lemp's lager in relatively cold storage. The Lemp brewing operation continued to flourish through the 1850s. Their beer won local taste tests. The attached pub, Lemp's Hall, became known for its moderate atmosphere, where only beer was sold, helping them avoid the violent, drunken reputation that liquor-fueled saloons often had. In less than 2 decades, Adam Lemp went from being a poor German immigrant to one of the wealthiest men in St. Louis. In 1848, he brought his wife Justine and his son Wilhelm, who would later become William, to America. But in 1862, Lemp's journey ended. He died at 49, leaving his booming business in the hands of his son, William J. Lemp. The empire he built was only just beginning, but it wouldn't be long before the Lemp family's fortune would take a dark and tragic turn. William J. Lemp was born in Germany, arriving in America at the age of 12. He attended St. Louis University, and at the outbreak of the Civil War, he joined the St. Louis Home Guard, where he patrolled a local arsenal. Shortly before his father's death, he married Julia Fikert. The advent of the Civil War brought countless troops through the city. Disenfranchised or disillusioned tradesmen roamed for work, and military supply clerks brokered with breweries to provide lager for the troops as it traveled better and stayed fresher longer than ale. The soldiers developed a taste for the beer, a preference they would take with them even when the war was won. In fact, the United States Sanitary Commission declared that lager reduced instances of camp diarrhea and prescribed it to wounded and healing soldiers. This widespread distribution and exposure led to a boom in the Lemp brewing business. William J. Lemp focused on expansion and efficiency, taking the brewery to new heights. He purchased a 5-block area around the storage cavern on Cherokee Street. He located more limestone caves, and he began to expand the brewing facility above the natural storage, eliminating the cumbersome task of transporting beer from the older 2nd Street Brewery. Again, these caves were ideal for storing beer before the advent of artificial refrigeration, maintaining a cool temperature year-round. Lemp's expanded facility would span an entire city block, extending 3 stories above and 3 stories below ground. In 1868, crews began construction on what would become Lemp Mansion. It was built by Jacob Fikert, his father-in-law, and the Lemps took the home as their residence. It would continue to evolve over time, receiving renovations to include the installation of an elevator and radiator system, new technologies at the time. By the early 1870s, Lemp's Western Brewery was not only the largest in St. Louis, a city with over 30 competing breweries, but also the 19th largest in the United States. In 1878, William incorporated artificial refrigeration into his operations. This advancement not only increased production capacity, but also enabled the Lemp Brewery to maintain a consistent product quality regardless of external temperature fluctuations. The modernization of the transportation and storage of Lemp beer allowed for coast-to-coast transportation, one of the first beer companies to do so in the United States. William also understood the importance of branding and advertising. He standardized the design of the company's beer labels, moving away from ornate designs to a simple, recognizable Lemp shield trademark. Additionally, he introduced the Falstaff beer in 1899, a beer which would become synonymous with American beer culture. Falstaff was named after the character from Shakespeare's plays, notably Henry IV. He was an audience favorite, and he embodied the fun and lighthearted spirit that Lemp wanted to associate with his beer. This branding strategy, combined with an extensive distribution network, made Falstaff a household name. William J. Lemp had 9 children, with only 6 surviving into adulthood. His eldest son, Frederick, born in 1873, was his chosen successor. Frederick, named after William's close friend and rival brewer, Frederick Pabst, was not just a namesake, he was his father's pride. The two were deeply connected, and Frederick was being groomed to take over the Lemp Empire. But the first tragedy struck in 1901, marking the beginning of the Lemp family's fall. Frederick, once strong and industrious, began to suffer from unexplained breathing problems. The doctor attributed it to overworking and advised rest. Frederick traveled to California with his wife and daughter, hopeful the ocean air would restore him, but it didn't. At just 28 years old, Frederick experienced sudden heart failure, which sent shockwaves through the family. His death would unleash a chain of tragedies that would haunt the family for generations, each more devastating than the last. When the news of Frederick's death arrived by telegram, it forever changed William Lemp. Consumed by grief, he built a massive mausoleum in a nearby cemetery, a haunting symbol of what was to come. William withdrew from the world, avoiding friends, family, and even the brewery. He walked to work via the cave system to avoid speaking to those on the street. His retreat from life became almost total, and those who knew him watched in silence as he crumbled. In January 1904, William suffered the loss of his best friend and son's namesake, Frederick Pabst. The loss shattered William completely, and his surviving sons Billy and Edwin were left to manage the brewery as their father isolated himself further. Then on the morning of February 13th, 1904, William Lemp dressed as if for work. At 9:30 a.m., he walked to his bedroom on the second floor of the mansion, took a .38 caliber Smith & Wesson revolver, and ended his life. A servant found the door locked, and when it was finally broken down, his sons discovered their father lying in bed with a gunshot wound to the head. He left no note, but it was clear that the weight of his grief over the deaths of his son and his best friend had been too much to bear. William was laid to rest beside his son Frederick in the mausoleum he had built. In death, father and son were reunited, but the darkness that consumed the Lemps was far from over. William J. Lemp Jr., also known as Billy, was the eldest of 6 surviving children. His life was one shaped by mounting pressures and inevitable collapse. As the 1904 World's Fair approached, he found himself thrust into the spotlight, a role he neither asked for nor desired. His father had been involved in the planning before his tragic death, and the Lemp Brewery had a large display among the world's best brewers and distillers. The fair was a success, but undercurrents of competition and social change began to stir. Nearly 10 competing local breweries united to form a powerful conglomerate, posing a serious threat. Even more, the temperance movement in America was growing, and there was a cultural clamoring for the prohibition of alcohol. After the suicide of his father, his mother moved to a room across the hall in Lemp Mansion. Shortly after, she was diagnosed with cancer, and by 1906, she was in constant agony. She died in April, joining William and Frederick in the mausoleum. Billy was devastated in the wake of so much loss. His personal life was just as fraught. His marriage to Lillian Hanlon in 1899 provided little relief or support. Hanlon was a wealthy socialite, her father accumulating a massive fortune from the manufacture of fixtures for railroad cars. Hanlon was known as the Lavender Lady because she almost exclusively wore lavender-colored clothing. Billy and Lillian lived a life of indulgence filled with grand parties, new automobiles, and a private railroad that linked the mansion to the brewery. Yet, the two had a turbulent marriage, and they divorced in 1909 in a scandalous and public affair filled with accusations of abuse, paranoia, and violent outbursts. Hanlon's attorneys claimed that Billy carried a gun and regularly threatened to kill his wife and others. The man who once commanded respect was now seen as erratic and dangerous. In the wake of the divorce, the brewery became secondary to the turmoil of his personal life. He remarried in 1911 and converted the Lemp Mansion into brewery offices after extensive renovations. As Prohibition loomed, Billy's refusal to adapt sealed the fate of the Lemp Empire. While other brewers prepared to pivot their factories to the production of yeast, soft drinks, and other items, Billy clung to tradition, believing that beer would never truly be outlawed. By the time Prohibition hit in 1920, the Lemp Brewery was in free fall. Attempts to produce non-alcoholic beer were met with disinterest, as those who wanted to continue to drink could purchase from local bootleggers. Buried beneath overhead and zero profitability, Billy Lemp shuttered the factory for good. But worse was yet to come. His youngest sister, Elsa, was the baby of the family. She was a spiritualist and held frequent seances at the Lemp Mansion before it was converted into an office space. She married a prominent businessman in 1910, but her marriage was rocky from the start. The two frequently shouted at one another, and it often escalated to physical violence, Elsa breaking vases or rushing her husband with a fire poker. In 1919, after a rocky divorce, she reconciled with her husband in 1920. A few days after their second marriage, she was found dead. The official ruling was that Elsa Lemp died by suicide at the age of 37. She was found in her bed, having shot herself in the heart with a small caliber handgun. However, some historians speculate that the cause of her death was suspect. Her husband was the only witness at the scene. He had not reported the death to the police, and he became agitated under questioning. Nevertheless, the official cause of death was never changed. Billy became a man haunted by loss, bearing the full weight of a disintegrating family and legacy. By 1922, the pressure was too much to bear. With mounting debts and staggering overhead, he sold off property at a public auction. Once valued at $7 million, he recouped less than $600,000, with the largest portion of the property being purchased by the International Shoe Company. Billy blamed himself entirely. He became erratic, withdrawn, turning to alcohol to dull the constant, crushing grief. He decided he would liquidate the company and sell the remaining properties. On December 29, 1922, Billy arrived at the Lemp Mansion, appearing calm, if not resigned. He spoke to his wife on the phone, sent his secretaries away, and locked himself in his office. Alone, he retrieved a revolver from his desk drawer, unbuttoned his vest, and shot himself in the heart. His son, arriving moments later, muttered strange and cryptic words. "You knew I knew it. I was afraid this was coming." What he meant, no one knew, and Billy left no note, following his father and sister into the darkness of a family curse. Billy Lemp's death marked the second suicide under the same roof, but it would not be the last. Charles Lemp, Billy's younger brother, was once involved in the family brewery, but as years passed, he distanced himself from the business, carving out a career in finance. He managed the family's wealth with caution, finding modest success on his own terms. But as the Lemp empire crumbled and the family's legacy darkened, Charles retreated from the world. He had lived in the Lemp Mansion until it was converted into offices, but after the brewery's collapse and Billy's tragic death, Charles returned to the nearly empty mansion. He spent years restoring and renovating it, determined to reclaim it as his home. His younger brother, Edwin, pleaded with him to sell the property, arguing that the mansion had become a monument to the family's endless tragedies. But Charles refused, drawn back to the place where so much had gone wrong. Once the mansion became his residence again, it also became his prison. Charles, who had never married, began living a life of extreme reclusiveness, his eccentricities growing with each passing year. He developed a pathological fear of germs, washing any money before touching it, and refusing to shake hands, even with close friends. Visitors, once rare, were eventually banned from the mansion altogether as Charles's isolation deepened. His only companions were a dog and a parrot, creatures that shared in his lonely existence. As the years wore on, Charles's health deteriorated. Severe arthritis and chronic pain plagued him, further driving him into solitude. Then, on May 10th, 1949, a servant discovered him in his bedroom with a gunshot wound to the head, a .38 caliber revolver resting on his chest. He left a carefully written suicide note, which included the sentence, "In case I am found dead, blame no one but me." He requested that his death not be publicized, and he wanted to be quietly cremated, his ashes buried on his farm, although no records exist of where this farm is located. The remaining Lemps, Hilda and Edwin, lived relatively solitary lives. Hilda married Gustav Pabst, son of the founder of Pabst Brewing Company, and she died a mother and widow in 1951. Edwin was a solitary individual who moved to the Cragwold estate in 1911, where he collected and managed an extensive exotic animal collection. Before his natural death in 1970, he requested that all the family heirlooms and artifacts be destroyed, including priceless documents and artwork. He wanted the story of the Lemps to remain in the past. In the late 1950s, the Lemp Mansion was purchased by a developer, and it was converted into a boarding house, providing accommodations for staff from the nearby Marion Hospital. However, the mansion's upkeep was severely neglected, and it soon fell into disrepair. Its deterioration mirrored the decline of the surrounding neighborhood, particularly with the construction of Interstate 55. While it was spared from demolition, the interstate's construction profoundly accelerated the economic and social decline of the area. The mansion became a decaying relic and the subject of rumor. Tenants in the boarding house reported that it was haunted by the restless spirit of its tragic past, describing unexplained noises and eerie apparitions. Residents reported being awoken at night by mysterious knocks on their doors, even when the halls were empty. These unsettling experiences contributed to the notoriety of the mansion and made it difficult for the boarding house to maintain full occupancy. It was around this time that tales of the Monkey Boy began to surface. The origins of the story are unknown, but many claim that the Monkey Boy was an illegitimate child of the philandering Billy Lemp, hidden away due to his severe physical and mental deformities. The boy was said to have been born with features that resembled a monkey, including a hunched back, elongated arms, and a face like a primate. To preserve the family's reputation, the Lemps supposedly kept the child hidden from society, confining him to the attic of the mansion, where he lived out his life in near total isolation. Only a few trusted servants were allowed to care for him, and his neglect and loneliness brought an even darker legend to the mansion. Many claimed to hear strange noises emanating from the attic where the boy was said to have been kept. The sounds ranged from shuffling footsteps to the faint cries of a child. Some even reported seeing a ghostly figure in the attic windows, further cementing the mansion's haunted reputation. Despite the vivid details of the Monkey Boy legend, no concrete evidence has ever been found to prove his existence. The absence of historical records or documentation has led some to believe that the story was an urban legend. Nevertheless, the story persists, fueled by the mansion's dark history and the numerous unexplained phenomena reported by those who have visited. In late 1974, the Lemp Mansion was sold to the Pointer family for $40,000. Despite its dilapidated condition, the Pointers saw potential in the crumbling estate. They began extensive restoration efforts, but it wasn't long until the Pointers discovered how the darkness seemed to come to life within the home. Dick Pointer Sr., a former paratrooper, described feeling frightened out of his wits as he worked to renovate the mansion. While painting a bathroom, he felt an inexplicable burning sensation and unsettling feeling that someone was watching him. His son, Dick Pointer Jr., lived in the mansion for 3 years during the restoration, often reporting strange occurrences in the night, doors slamming, footsteps echoing through the halls. On one night, while lying in bed, he heard a door slam elsewhere in the house. Fearing intruders, he took his dog to investigate. The dog was agitated, whining and growling, but Dick found all the doors and windows locked. Patty Pointer, another family member, reported hearing piano music from an empty room, bells ringing without cause, and even witnessed a candle lighting itself. Others reported seeing the ghost of Charles Lemp, still dressed in his frock coat and black hat, walking up and down the street at night, further intensifying the eerie atmosphere. As renovations progressed, workers weren't immune to the supernatural happenings either. When artist Claude Breckwald was hired to restore the intricate murals in the mansion, he made a startling discovery. He found that the murals he was hired to restore were painted in the same style and color of his ancestor, a German muralist named Janssen. Breckwald, an immigrant from South Africa, was shocked to find his ancestors' work in a place so steeped in mystery, as though the house itself had summoned him for its own restoration. While working on the mural, Breckwald had such an intense sensation of being watched by something malicious that he fled the home, running for the street to escape the oppressive feeling. One particular apparition, the man with the shiny shoes, had been reported since the mansion's days as a boarding house. A former tenant had written to Dick Pointer Sr., describing an encounter with a man in a brand new pair of shiny shoes. This spirit has been seen by multiple visitors over the years, making his presence one of the mansion's most enduring mysteries. The Pointers embraced the haunted reputation. When they opened the restaurant in 1977, it immediately drew ghost hunters and paranormal enthusiasts. Shortly after opening, a former journalist, paranormal investigation group, and television crew held a seance and investigation. After only 10 minutes, a table began to vibrate slightly before shaking vigorously for several minutes. The journalist, initially doubtful, left the session convinced something inexplicable had occurred. Other reports included levitating glasses, doors locking and unlocking by themselves, and the sound of hooves on cobblestone echoing through the halls. Some paranormal researchers have suggested that the ghostly activity in the Lemp Mansion might be intensified by the presence of the limestone caves beneath it. They claim that the chemical properties of limestone, notably the calcium carbonate, could facilitate the absorption and release of electromagnetic fields that are thought to be associated with paranormal activity. Essentially, the stone would function like the magnetic tape inside a cassette, recording impressions and playing them back through time. In 1982, Life magazine declared the Lemp Mansion one of the 10 most haunted houses in America. The restaurant became a thriving attraction, drawing in visitors from all over the country. Yet not all guests were comfortable staying for long. Overnight guests frequently left in the middle of the night, unable to shake the feeling that the house was watching them. Others reported mysterious sensations, such as cigar smoke filling the air, imprints of footsteps at the end of their bed, and the sight of shadowy figures lurking in the corners of the room. What binds us to our own tragedy? The constant weight of our history, a story of unspeakable pain we cannot escape. As time moves forward, we become inured to our losses, desperately trying to forget the people and places that broke us. But we can't. We have been winnowed down, worn away, and reshaped into something unrecognizable. The Lemp Mansion stands as a monument, a place where the echoes of the past repeat endlessly through generations of family, through centuries of time. Even now, they are bound in spirit or story, trapped inside the very walls that witnessed their collapse. Perhaps what makes the story of the Lemps so compelling is that we share their fate. We are drawn to repeat the patterns of the past, as if some part of us can never leave.